So here is one of the most, frustrating biological paradoxes you will probably ever encounter. The harder you breathe, the more you sweat, and the closer you push yourself to absolute exhaustion, well, the less body fat you are actually burning.
It's completely counterintuitive.
Right. I mean, think about that for a second. Welcome to today's deep dive. It is April 29, 2026, and today we are getting into a massive stack of sources. We've got clinical biology excerpts, some cutting-edge longevity science, and elite performance protocols. And they all point to this really incredible reality.
It's a reality a lot of people are struggling with, honestly.
Exactly, because millions of people, maybe even you listening right now, are out there doing these grueling, high-stress, sweat-drenched workouts every single day. I mean, they're absolutely torching their central nervous systems, leaving zero in the tank, and yet
they see absolutely no changes in their body composition.
Right, zero changes. They are essentially trapped in this cycle of high fatigue and low adaptation. So our mission today is to decode exactly why this happens, to kind of dismantle this whole no pain, no gain myth, and to give you the blueprint for true metabolic flexibility without burning out your nervous system in the process.
Which is so needed right now. It really is kind of a tragedy of modern fitness culture.
Yeah.
We have this culturally ingrained idea that if you aren't suffering, you aren't progressing.
Yeah, the whole leave it all on the gym floor mentality.
Exactly. But clinically, upgrading your metabolism isn't about punishing your body. It is entirely about how you communicate with it at the cellular level. When you exhaust yourself daily, you're sending a systemic panic signal, not a biological adaptation signal.
Not signal, okay.
Right. And to understand why we get trapped in this high fatigue, zero result cycle, we really have to look closely at substrate utilization, which just means the actual fuel your cells are choosing to burn to produce ATP, your cellular energy.
Right. And as we know from the sources, our bodies essentially use two main substrates to fund that ATP production. We have glucose, which is derived from carbohydrates, and lipids, which are derived from your stored adipose tissue or body fat.
You're correct.
But the choice between which of those two fuels your body actually uses isn't just some random coin toss, right? It's not just 50-50.
Not at all. It is entirely dictated by the intensity of your movement and the demand for rapid energy. So let's look at the cellular mechanics of high-intensity exercise. Say you are doing a heavy sprint, or you're deep into one of those grueling boot camp classes.
Oh, yeah, the ones where you can barely breathe.
Right, exactly. Your heart rate spikes dramatically. The demand for energy in your muscle cells is immense, and most importantly, it is immediate. To meet that frantic demand, your body preferentially burns glucose through a process called glycolysis.
Because it's faster.
Exactly. Because glucose can be broken down extremely quickly without needing large amounts of oxygen.
But there is a massive biochemical penalty for doing that, right? Because the byproduct of burning glucose at that frantic pace is lactate.
Yes. And this is where a huge misunderstanding happens. Most people think of lactate just as a waste product, the thing that makes your muscles burn the next day.
Right, lactic acid buildup, everyone complains about it.
Well, lactate is actually a highly potent signaling molecule. As it builds up in the blood, it lowers the cellular pH, and more critically, it biochemically suppresses the oxidation of fatty acids.
Wait.
Yeah.
Let me stop you right there because this is the fundamental aha moment of the whole stack of data today. By pushing into that high-intensity red zone and flooding the system with lactate, you are actively shutting the door on your fat stores.
You are. It literally acts on the receptors of your adipose tissue to inhibit lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat.
So the lactate is essentially telling the cell, hey, we are in a massive emergency, we only have time for sugar, lock down the fat.
That is the precise mechanism, yes. Going harder biochemically locks the vault. The lipids in your adipose tissue are rendered totally inaccessible. I mean, you are burning calories, certainly, but you are entirely dependent on sugar for that energy.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because if I'm listening to this, I'm probably thinking, okay, but a calorie deficit is a calorie deficit, right?
I hear that all the time.
If I do a 20-minute high-intensity workout and burn 400 calories versus a 40-minute walk where I burn 300, doesn't the math still favor the high intensity? Why does it actually matter what the substrate is as long as the energy is burned?
Well, if you view the human body as a simple thermodynamic calculator, yeah, that logic holds up. But the body is an incredibly complex, highly adaptive chemical laboratory. It's about substrate partitioning and long-term metabolic flexibility.
Which means what exactly for the average person?
It means if you constantly rely on high-intensity workouts, Your body adapts by getting extremely efficient at storing and burning sugar, and incredibly inefficient at mobilizing fat.
Oh, wow. So you're training your body to ignore the fat.
Right. You spend your entire day on a blood sugar roller coaster. When you use glucose, your blood sugar drops, your brain signals intense hunger, you eat more carbs to replenish, and the cycle just continues. You never actually teach your cellular machinery how to comfortably oxidize fat at rest.
And what about the famous afterburn effect? Because for years, the fitness industry sold high-intensity interval training, HIA, as the absolute holy grail because of EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. The pitch was always, you do a 15-minute HIA session and your metabolism is magically elevated for 24 hours. Does the clinical data actually support that?
The clinical data dismantles it quite thoroughly, actually.
Really?
Yeah, EPOC does exist, but the magnitude of the calorie burn is drastically overstated in pop fitness.
Yeah.
We're talking about maybe an extra 30 to 50 calories over the course of the day.
Which is like half an apple.
Exactly. It is not moving the needle on your body composition.
Yeah.
Now, HIT is excellent for very specific adaptations, like increasing your VO2 max, building explosive power, and improving vascular resilience. But it is a highly inefficient way to clear stubborn adipose tissue if it isn't supported by a massive aerobic base.
Which brings us perfectly to the actual solution, because if high-intensity locks the vault, as we said, we need a different key, and all these sources point directly to the elegance of Zone 2 training.
Yes, Zone 2. It's defined as steady, moderate-intensity exercise where your energy is produced primarily through the oxidative system.
Meaning it requires oxygen.
Exactly. At this metabolic threshold, the demand for energy is slow and steady. Because you are operating below the lactate threshold, your mitochondria have ample time and oxygen to mobilize and burn stored lipids rather than tapping into your precious glycogen reserves.
And here is where the whole concept of adaptation comes in, which is really the central thesis of everything we are discussing today. Adaptation is the physical and neurological process by which your body fundamentally alters its structure to become better suited to the demands you place on it.
Yes.
So spending time in Zone 2 doesn't just burn fat in the moment. It actually triggers a profound signaling cascade, specifically through a pathway known as PGC1 alpha, which stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis.
And that is the critical takeaway right there. Mitochondrial biogenesis means you are signaling your cells to increase the size, the density, and the sheer number of mitochondria within your muscle fibers.
So you are literally building a larger, more efficient cellular engine.
You are. And because mitochondria prefer fat as a substrate in the presence of oxygen, having more of them means you become a fat-burning machine around the clock. Even when you are just sitting at your desk or sleeping, your baseline metabolism shifts toward lipid oxidation.
Now, there is a brilliant scientific metaphor in the source material that I think makes this incredibly tangible for anyone listening. They compare the human energy system to an advanced, high-performance hybrid vehicle.
I love this analogy.
Right. Under the hood, you essentially have two completely different engines.
The first is the electric motor. This represents your oxidative system, powered by fat, used during Zone 2 training. Electric motors are incredibly efficient, they run smoothly, and in this metaphor, the motor is hooked up to a massive, almost limitless battery pack.
And that battery pack is your stored adipose tissue.
Exactly. Even an exceptionally lean athlete has tens of thousands of calories stored in this biological battery.
You could drive this vehicle across the entire country on the electric motor, provided you maintain a steady, moderate cruising speed.
But you also have the second engine, which is the traditional high-powered gasoline combustion engine. This represents your glycolytic system, used for high-intensity anaerobic work.
Right, so you slam your foot on the accelerator to sprint up a steep hill, and the gas engine roars to life. It gives you massive explosive power.
But it burns through a very tiny tank of premium gas incredibly fast.
The glycogen.
That tiny tank is your stored glycogen. And as we discussed earlier, running that gas engine produces heavy exhaust.
The lactate. The exhaust chokes out the efficiency of the electric motor. Now, if I can add another layer to this analogy, just because I think it highlights exactly why so many people feel exhausted all the time, think about battery degradation.
Okay.
If you own a hybrid car and you constantly floor the accelerator every single time you drive, you're only ever draining the tiny gas tank. You're constantly pulling over, begging for a refill of premium sugar. But worse, you are totally ignoring the massive battery in the trunk.
Which is terrible for a battery.
Right. Biologically, if you never use that metabolic pathway, you lose the enzymes required to access it. your battery degrades, you completely lose metabolic flexibility.
And when the gas tank overflows because you've consumed more sugar than you can burn, your body simply shuttles the excess straight into the battery pack as new adipose tissue. It is a one-way street into the battery with no exit strategy.
It's just the perfect storm of high fatigue and fat storage. So let's pivot to the mechanics of this. How do you actually build this electric engine?
The sources outline a very specific behavioral toolkit. And what I really love about this is that it requires absolutely zero financial investment. No gym memberships, no expensive gear.
The first pillar of this toolkit is identifying your specific zone 2 threshold. Clinically, we call this the conversational cadence standard.
Okay, let me push back on this right away. I have a very expensive smartwatch that constantly feeds me my heart rate data. It gives me my zones based on a formula. Why wouldn't I just stare at my wrist instead of using some subjective talk test?
It's a great question, and honestly, it's one of the most common pitfalls people run into. The formulas used by commercial smartwatches, usually 220 minus your age, multiplied by a percentage, are generalized population averages.
So they don't know me. Right. They do not account for your individual stroke volume, your cellular efficiency, or your unique lactate curve. Furthermore, wrist-based optical sensors have a significant lag in error rate during movement.
So the watch might say, I'm in zone 2.
While biochemically, your lactate levels have already spiked and you are deep into glycolysis. Yes.
Wow. So the technology is actually lying to my biology.
Frequently, yes. The talk test, however, is directly tied to your ventilatory threshold. It is a physiological reality, not an algorithm.
How does it work in practice?
When you are moving, whether you are brisk walking, cycling, or rucking, you must be able to maintain a continuous, unbroken conversation. You need to be able to speak in full, complex sentences.
But there is a nuance here, right? Because it shouldn't feel like a casual stroll through the grocery store.
Correct. The person listening to you should be able to hear a slight, distinct strain in your voice. You are working, but you are not breathless. If you have to pause in the middle of a sentence to gasp for air, you have crossed a threshold, you've woken up the gas engine, you are producing lactate, and you have shut down fat oxidation. You have to slow your pace immediately until your breathing stabilizes.
That is such an actionable metric. You can do that literally anywhere. Now let's talk about the duration, because the sources are very strict about the time requirement here. They outline what they call the minimum effective dose window, and they insist on 45 continuous minutes per session.
Yes, 45 minutes.
Why 45? That feels like an oddly specific, almost arbitrary number to me. Why not 2 20-minute sessions?
It comes back to respecting the biological mechanisms at play. We have to look at the transit time of fat. Lipid mobilization is a fundamentally slow process. Let's trace the journey of a single lipid molecule when you start a zone 2 session.
Okay, walk me through it. Minute 1 to minute 45.
All right, at minute 1, your heart rate elevates gently. It takes several minutes just for the central nervous system to send the signal to your adipose tissue that energy is even required.
It's like sending a text message that takes 5 minutes to deliver.
Exactly. And once the signal finally arrives, enzymes have to literally break down the stored triglycerides into free fatty acids. Those fatty acids then have to exit the fat cell, enter the bloodstream, and bind to a transport protein called albumin just to move through your circulatory system.
So they're essentially hitching a ride through the bloodstream?
Exactly. Then they have to reach the active muscle tissue, detach from the albumin, cross the cell membrane, and finally get shuttled into the mitochondria by a specialized carrier called carnitine.
That is a massive logistical pipeline.
It is, and this entire logistical pipeline takes roughly 20 to 30 minutes just to reach its peak operational flow.
Oh, wow. So if I stop at minute 20...
If you stop at minute 20, you've barely primed the pump. You haven't kept the system running long enough to signal the need for adaptation. You have to ride that wave.
So the 45-minute mark is there to ensure what?
It ensures that you spend a solid 15 to 25 minutes operating at peak lipid oxidation. That sustained stress is what triggers the PGC1 alpha pathway we mentioned earlier, essentially telling the body, hey, this is a regular demand. We need to build more mitochondria.
That makes perfect sense when you actually lay out the logistics of it. And for longevity and metabolic health, the sources pinpoint the gold standard as accumulating between 150 to 180 minutes of this specific training per week.
Which breaks down to about 3 or 4 45-minute sessions. It is a highly accessible target for most people.
Yeah, totally doable. And while we are talking about this prolonged, steady effort, we have to talk about what this is doing to your myocardium, right? Because this isn't just about skeletal muscle and body fat. This is heavily about cardiovascular adaptation.
Absolutely. The myocardium is the highly specialized muscular tissue of the heart itself. Now, high-intensity training forces the heart to beat extremely fast, to push blood out against high pressure, which can actually thicken the heart walls over time.
Which isn't necessarily what we want for longevity.
Right. But zone 2 provides a completely different stimulus. Because the heart rate is elevated but steady, the chambers of the heart have time to fully fill with blood before contracting.
So you are stretching the left ventricle.
Precisely. You are improving the elasticity and increasing the stroke volume. That's the sheer amount of blood the myocardium can pump with a single beat.
This is why elite endurance athletes have those incredibly low resting heart rates, right? Like
Right.
40 beats a minute.
Exactly. Their hearts have adapted to pump massive volumes of blood with effortless efficiency. You are literally building a bigger, stronger, more efficient pump that works less hard for the rest of your life.
Okay, so we know we need 45 minutes, we know we need to pass the talk test, and we understand the incredible cellular and cardiovascular adaptations taking place. But the sources provide one final strategy to really supercharge this whole process.
They do.
And it involves when you do this training. They strongly advocate for a strategic fasted activation.
Doing your Zone 2 session first thing in the morning after an overnight fast leverages your natural hormonal rhythms to maximize fat oxidation.
Now, wait a minute. Isn't fasted cardio just an old fitness trick to keep overall daily calories low? Does the timing actually change the biology?
Oh, the timing profoundly changes the biology, primarily because of insulin.
Okay, how so?
Insulin is a storage hormone. When insulin levels are elevated, even slightly, say from a small snack, it severely blunts lipolysis. The adipose tissue just locks down.
So no fat is coming out.
None. But when you wake up in the morning after 8 hours of fasting, your circulating insulin is at its absolute lowest baseline. Furthermore, your liver glycogen is slightly depleted from keeping your brain functioning overnight.
So going back to our hybrid car metaphor, the tiny gas tank is already starting out half empty.
Exactly. The environment is perfectly primed. Because insulin is suppressed and glycogen is low, if you begin a steady-state bout of exercise, your body is virtually forced to rely on the electric motor. You bypass that slow transition phase and ramp up lipid oxidation much faster.
But the critical rule here, though, is not to ruin that delicate environment before you start. The protocol in the sources is incredibly strict about this.
Very strict.
You can drink pure water and you can have black coffee, but absolutely no milk, no cream, no sugar, no pre-workout gummies. Even a tiny insulin spike will shut down the entire mechanism, right?
That's right. You have to keep the insulin flat and let the body feed on itself. Black coffee is actually an excellent addition, as caffeine acts as a mild stimulant that can further enhance the mobilization of free fatty acids from your adipose tissue.
Just keep it 0 calorie.
Exactly. You must keep it 0 calorie.
So if we synthesize all this data we've covered today, the ultimate takeaway completely shifts the paradigm as how we should view our daily movement. Finding true metabolic flexibility where your body just seamlessly transitions between fuel sources requires immense patience. You do not have to crush yourself into the floor to see results.
In fact, we now know that constantly crushing yourself is biochemically counterproductive.
It is the ultimate irony. Slowing down, honoring the biological transit times of your cellular hardware, and respecting the elegant mechanics of your oxidative system is the true performance enhancer.
It really is. It's about unlocking that endless reservoir of energy in your biological battery.
Building a foundation of vitality that isn't just about, surviving a summer beach trip, but about thriving for decades. Which actually brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today.
Okay.
We've spent this entire deep dive exploring how high physical stress and breathlessness biochemically lock the body into a sugar-burning, fat-storing panic state. The lactate builds up, the gas engine roars, and the battery is completely ignored.
Right.
Well, it makes you wonder about the rest of our lives. If physical panic locks the vault, what about psychological panic? If our modern, fast-paced, high-stress daily lives have us constantly rushing, drinking way too much caffeine, and breathing shallowly at our desks, are we keeping our cellular machinery trapped in that exact same gas engine panic mode, even when we haven't exercised a single muscle?
That is a fascinating question.
Could finding a psychological zone 2, like a state of steady, manageable, oxygen-rich calm in our daily routine, be just as vital for healing our metabolism as that 45-minute morning walk? Something to seriously think about as you go about your day. Keep asking questions, keep adapting, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.